Hey everyone, I'm going to be super busy with damage testing for the Epic Raid Race over the next couple of weeks, so probably don't expect videos from me as often as I have produced them for the last month, but I will leave you with an absolute banger of a video I've been waiting to make for a while that I think you guys are going to love. This is really unique content, something like a space that Destiny content creators really haven't explored, especially to this degree in the past. I mean, I guess you could say that about a lot of my content, but still, pretty exciting stuff, and really excited to present this to you. So today, without further ado, let's talk about the hardest day one ever, why the Desert Perpetual raid race was a completely different beast in a bunch of different ways compared to past day one raid races. We're going to be talking about a lot of different factors, some of which you probably haven't even considered, and some of which are going to be exclusive to this channel because of data that I was relatively fortunate to have access to after the day one, because I recorded my entire VOD with Destiny Damage Tracker active for most of my clear. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and go over to our outline. So in this video, I want to cover 5 major factors that affected this raid race. First, we have disables, which were different in this raid race compared to past ones. We have reserve changes because of the inventory size conversion. Now, whether or not these were target nerfs or not, we're going to talk about that when we get to this slide, but we'll leave that for the second slide. Bugs, instance bug, pretty common, pretty well known at this point that was happening during this raid race. We have the power delta, which was discussed a little bit in the aftermath of the raid race as well. We have boss health, which I don't think has been discussed at all because nobody really has access to how much health the bosses had on day one. Fortunately, I had Destiny Damage Tracker open for my entire or almost my entire clear. And so I was actually able to get enough health bar data to get realistic estimates of how much health these bosses actually had. And then number 6, we have a little summary for those of you that just want the meat of this video. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with our first slide on disables. Now, right off the rip, I want to introduce you to this topic by talking about the disabled items list for the past 5 raid races, so SE all the way back to VOW. In SE, I've highlighted, as you can see here in teal/blue, everything that I think would have potentially maybe been used during the race because it was maybe meta at the time. So in Salvation's Edge, Lucky Pants was not nearly as prominent as it was right now. A lot of people, I mean, it's class specific to begin with, and a lot of people, that was not their main damage strategy going into the race. You have Cascade Point, Mag Howl, Facet of Command, and Ascension. Ascension wasn't super popular at the time either. And then you have Relentless Strikes, which if you wanted to do sword damage, for example, on Herald, that was, I suppose, kind of important, but some people still use swords anyways. So yeah, Relentless Strikes was disabled. And then you have Crota's End, Tessellation, Foe Tracer. Reserve mods were disabled because of an exploit that you could do with swapping between loadouts to generate ammo out of thin air. But during contests, a lot of people are not running reserve mods anyway. They prioritize resists. You have font mods, which were, of course, talking about stat boosters, which were not as significant back then. Various artifact mods, which were not that important. Weave Walk was not meta back then. I mean, you can argue it's not really meta right now. And then Banner of War, which had just been released in its pre-nerf form, was very strong. And so people expected it to be disabled for this day one. Next up, you have Root of Nightmares. None of these options, Grand Overture is considered maybe meta for day ones now, and maybe Hierarchy of Needs as well, but none of this stuff was considered meta at the time, right? So none of it is going to be highlighted. You have King's Fall, where heavy jails as an entire class of weapon were disabled. Now you can make the argument that heavy jails were not really that meta at the time anyway. Everyone was going into this with like font linears with like triple tab firing line reads and stuff like that. So maybe you could argue that this was not that impactful, but this is the first and only time, at least in recent memory, that Bungie's disabled an entire class of weapons going into a day one raid race. So I wanted to include it and highlight it just in case maybe a team would have used it. We have Quicksilver Storm, which was disabled. Was pretty strong at the time, but not a damage strategy, so I'm not going to highlight it. Point Contact Cannon Brace, again, not really a meta or anything. And then finally, we have Vow the Disciple, where most of this stuff was disabled because of bugs, right? Grand Overture was not really super meta at the time either. And then you have Worm God Caress, which I believe was disabled because of either like Shield Bash or something like that. So, you know, again, not that important, relatively niche stuff. Now compare that to Desert Perpetual, where we have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 hard meta options that were disabled before the race, 3 of which were disabled 2 days before the race. Barrow Dyad, Hierarchy of Needs, and Grand Overture were disabled 2 days before the race itself. On the past slide, on the previous slide, almost all the options that I mentioned were, you know, the community was informed of these well in advance. So these 3 options being disabled 2 days before the race definitely threw a wrench in a lot of people's plans. My team had been planning on using Outbreak Perfected for the race for months, for like 3, 4, 5, 6 months before the race, because I did the damage, I did the math, and I realized Outbreak competes with good exotic specials, bad exotic heavies, has infinite total, and when 200 super comes out, is going to be the defining meta option for high damage, sustained, consistent gameplay on day one. And I was right, and they disabled it, right? So 4 meta options were disabled. I don't think we've ever had, really, in the past 5 raid races, like I showed you on the previous slides, a single meta option where people were considering it to be their main damage strategy disabled with this close in proximity to the raid race. And not only that, there's 4 of them. So if you had alternatives, Grand Overture, high total damage, easy to use, decent for ad clear, good ammo economy, Barrow Diet, hierarchy of needs, infinite damage primaries. If you were planning on using these weapons as an alternative to Outbreak, they were also disabled on top of stuff like Choir and Icebreaker and Third Iteration, all of which were, decently strong as well, but not necessarily for damage, right? And then you have mods like Distribution and Temporal mods. Not going to highlight those, but really, these 4 options, definitely a precedent setter, and I think definitely the first time we've ever seen, I don't know, Bungie still, I guess, hasn't really justified some of these disables. I mean, Grand Overture had the fire rate change during the instance bug, and Outbreak Perfected, there were like rumors that it was doing bug damage with like anti-barrier pulse, and the same can be said for Third Iteration, but for options like Barrow Diet and Hierarchy of Needs, these were disabled purely out of, oh, we don't want you playing this way, right? Which is definitely a little different, right, I guess? Because in the past, it's either been, oh, this damage is way too OP, like Worm Gods or something like that, or Banner of War, or, oh, this weapon is literally just bugged, right? Like Imperial Needle during Vow. That was disabled because it got the exotic primary 40% boost that Tiku's did. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of, I don't know, this is just a new territory, I guess, for disables, right? Which is, I don't know, kind of interesting. I guess it's a QA thing, but I'm just surprised that Bungie implemented super changes where they were like, yeah, we're going to make supers a lot stronger, and we know that super generation is really good on certain weapon types, and we didn't tune accordingly in advance. And now we kind of have to like go back and retroactively like, disable things, even though they're like part of the sandbox that we advertised, which would be like, really powerful with these stat changes in the Edge of Fate. So yeah, this is definitely a first. Let's go ahead and talk about reserve changes. Now, a lot of content creators didn't really cover this because they didn't really have access to the data, or maybe we're not as familiar with the data, but a lot of exotics, and of course legendaries as well, but I'm going to talk mostly about exotics because they're more relevant during day ones, got their reserves nerfed, even at 0 reserves, right? Even at 0 reserves, if we're comparing apples to apples, because now you can't have reserve mods anymore, right? So we're comparing 0 reserves right now to 0 reserves in the past, because in the past you'd probably use resist mods anyway. And a bunch of meta exotics got their reserves nerfed. Legend of Acreus, 18 to 16, Leviathan's Breath, blah, 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 Grand Overture, which was disabled, Cloud Strike, Whisper, Still Hunt, Queenbreaker, and Lord of Wolves. I would argue Queenbreaker and Lord of Wolves were the 2 most prominent exotics coming into this next day one. Both of them got their reserves reduced by 22% and 31% respectively, at least as far as I know, with no comment from Bungie in the patch notes, right? Now, you can say that, oh, this was a result of them changing the inventory size stat into the ammo generation stat, which again, I believe wasn't explicitly covered by them either, but in this conversion, it's kind of awfully convenient that the 2 most meta weapons, Queenbreaker and Lord of Wolves, got nerfed the hardest. I'm pretty sure I ordered these just in order of like how much they got nerfed. So nothing was nerfed as hard as Lord of Wolves, for example, from 273 to 189, which is, I don't know, just pretty crazy to think about that. That's just not in the patch notes, right? Minus 31%. That's a lot of total damage that you're losing. And then at 3 reserves, if we compare, because there's some encounters definitely on day 1 where people were willing to run reserves and, run the higher risk of dying during damage. But yeah, at 3 reserves compared to what we have right now, every single exotic in this game lost total damage, regardless of what inventory size stat they were at initially and, how that kind of survived the conversion. Every single exotic in the game lost total damage. On average, almost 20% of their damage was removed, except Anarchy. Anarchy, I think it got buffed across the patch, so it survived, and it actually got a little bit more total damage. It got some more shots. But every single exotic, besides Anarchy, lost total damage with an average of 19%. And as usual, thank you to Spider Reviver, one of my good friends who does, Destiny data science work. And he kept a spreadsheet of all the exotic changes and tracked 0 reserves from patch to patch. He did a great job, and this data that you see on screen would not be possible without him. So thank you to Spider. But yeah, this is an eye-opening change, right? Not really something people necessarily thought about because everybody was focused on the disables and the sandbox and that sort of stuff. But you have to keep in mind that a lot of our total damage options that were so important to us coming into this day one, like Queenbreaker, like Lord of Wolves, like stuff like even Whisper, just got nerfed. And there was not really much mention of this in the patch notes. I mean, it would be hard to kind of say all of these nerfs because it was a system-wide change, but this is still like a big change to like not really talk about even. So interesting stuff there. Next up, we have bugs. You have the instance bug. So this might be, at least in my recent memory, the worst non-error code related issue in racing. So during this race, for those of you that are not familiar, but I think you all are at this point because Bungie has addressed this bug directly, there was an issue where if you spent a long enough time in the instance, and during day one, this was like 2 or 3 hours, if you spent enough time in an instance, just things would stop working. Your weapons would start firing at the wrong rate. You would have linears, like Sleeper, for example, would just have the wrong charge time. Your weapons would randomly get more or less reserves. Your sprint would stop working. Perks like Eager Edge would stop working. Intrinsics would stop working. For example, Mountaintop's micro missile, when you shot it, it would just shoot like a lightweight gel. The projectile would have gravity. Reloads were working incorrectly. For example, shotguns like Duality, when you had to reload the entire weapon, instead of getting your entire mag back, it would reload one at a time. So yeah, everybody on my team, at least, we did rejoins and restarts every hour or two, maybe every 2 or 3 hours, right? I went back in my day one VOD and I was just constantly relaunching the raid every time I scrubbed through a couple hours. So that was also something that definitely affected, I guess, the experience of the raid. Maybe not the difficulty as much, but the experience for sure. Also, I suppose an honorable mention goes to the terrain bug, which apparently persisted through rejoins and restarts for a certain team on day one. I don't think anybody else experienced this bug from what I was seeing at least, but that definitely affected at least someone's experience. But yeah, I think that covers pretty much all of the bugs. Now, the next 2 topics that I want to talk about are where we really dive into the data a lot more. So hang on tight with me here. Next up, we have the power delta comparison. So shout out to Mossy Max. He definitely provided me with some very important data here, but I just want to compare 2 values here real quick. So when you think of a contest modifier, when you think of contest mode, right? Obviously the amount of damage that you deal to bosses is going to be reduced. So in the past, this has been about 54 or 55% of your normal damage, right? And I'm comparing not necessarily apples to apples here, but I'm comparing Bungie's contest experience during a DLC versus Bungie's what they want their regular raid experience to be during a DLC. So during Final Shape, this was -5 after the surge change, right? So after all raids and dungeons were given permanent 25% surges to outgoing damage, that was what Bungie curated as their normal raid experience. And if you were doing contest, for example, doing Witness on contest, -25 SC contest, versus the Final Shape -5 with surges, which happened like a month later, you were doing around 54% of the damage. Like the number you would see when shooting Witness on contest would be 54% of the number that you saw afterward in the Final Shape with -5 and surges, right? Now compare that to Desert Perpetual contest. Now, the -40 and the -25 and the -5 numbers here, they're not the same scale. They're not the same scale. So don't worry too much about that when I say -40 DP contest. Don't let that scare you too much, but I do want you to focus on the number, okay? So according to Mossy Max, and I went and confirmed this with my own measurements, DP contest is equivalent to -40 on the new scale, on the new power scale, with new gear compensation, right? So they disabled the new gear bonus, and then they gave everyone a free 10% to all of their weapons. Weapons only. Note, I put weapons only here. Your abilities are doing 10% less. Now, that's with the 10%, you're doing 28.82 or 29% of your damage. So, assuming -5 with surges is somewhat equivalent to +0 in our current state of raids, we lost about 47% of our equivalent damage in DP contest compared to SC. So about half. You are doing half the damage on DP contest to bosses at least compared to SC contest. That's crazy, is it not? That's pretty crazy, right? So the delta is definitely very different. And now you might be asking, is -5 with surges in the Final Shape even equivalent to +0 in the Edge of Fate? And the answer is yes. We've gone over boss health changes. If you go to my boss health video called What Happened to Boss Health in the Edge of Fate, you can take a look there and see that all the effective boss health, so that, for example, like the number of Xeno shots it would take you to kill Templar, to kill Kali, is about the same. It's 3 to 5% up and down differences, but that can be measurement error. So on average, it's about the same. And so you can say that -5 with surges in the Final Shape is approximately equivalent to the experience of damaging bosses at +0 in the Edge of Fate. And so that we can say that you did in fact lose about half of your damage in DP contest compared to SC. Apples to apples, sort of. Green apples to red apples, you know? Okay, so that's the power delta comparison. Let's talk about boss health, right? Because all of this means nothing if the boss health in DP is custom tuned, right? So what if, to compensate for the fact that you're losing half your damage compared to a raid like SC contest, what if the bosses have half the health that they do on normal? Like what is the health like? Well, to answer that question, I have some very interesting and unique data. So for those of you that don't know, that are maybe watching this video and you haven't seen my channel before, I have this tool that I use that was made by 2016 Toyota Corolla, bless his heart, and it's a measuring tool. It's called Destiny Damage Tracker, and it allows you to see exactly how much health is left on a health bar down to the pixel, right? So it just reads the amount of yellow pixels on your screen, and I had this open during most of my day one clear. I had it for the last 3 bosses, which for my team were Wyvern and Hobgoblin and finally Harpy and final boss, right? So basically what this does is every single time you're about to wipe, I had this open because I wanted to see whether a phase was clearable or not, right? Because it's nice to be able to eyeball things and be like, oh yeah, that's about 2/3 of its health. But it's nice to have like an actual number and be like, oh yeah, we did exactly 45% of his health. This looks clearable. So I just had it open, you know, just kind of for like precision's sake. So for Apoptes, I didn't have DDT on, and then I decided, oh, I should probably just have the tool on for a boss like Iatros, because Iatros phases were way shorter, and I was like, oh, you know, like, it'll be easier to tell if this is like clearable damage or not, right? So I had it open and left it open for Iatros, for Agrios, and Korrigos. And so what this does is I have a bunch of wipe screens where I was able to count up the wipe screen numbers and then compare it proportionally to the health bar. And so, yes, I know wipe screens are unreliable, and when I counted up my numbers visually during a damage phase compared to the wipe screen, they were a little different, right? And so I got a little scared when I was doing this kind of calculation for this kind of video, because I don't want to say necessarily that this for sure happened when I don't know for sure, because as you guys know, during this DLC, there are a ton of raid boss wipe screens right now that are reporting damage numbers incorrectly. And according to my friend Spider, however, there is a little quirk here where these raid boss wipe screens that are reporting numbers incorrectly, they're always by a specific and large fraction. For example, like 7/4 or 3/2 or something like that. So for example, Templar's wipe screen, he is reporting 50% lower damage on the wipe screen compared to how much you actually do to him on the health bar, as well as visually when you shoot him with a gun and you see the number pop up on your screen. So there's precedent for this. I'm a little bit worried. What if the DP wipe screens on contests were reporting damage incorrectly? Well, I have 2 counter arguments against this. Number 1 is that, first of all, the normal DP bosses right now do not have incorrectly reporting wipe screens. That's number 1, at least to my knowledge. And then number 2 is none of the data that I was able to gather was anywhere near the fractions that Spider was talking about. It was like 13k versus I did 14k on my screen, and on the wipe screen I ended up doing 13.5k. So it's like a little bit off. But again, I was counting a bunch of like tiny numbers. I had Hellion on, I was counting all the Scorch Sticks, I was counting all my rocket damage, like I was counting all these numbers, right? And so that's fairly reasonable. And Spider, who I trust, you know, with this sort of stuff, he thinks it's probably just accurate. The wipe screen is probably just accurate. And some of these differences are large enough that they cannot be attributed to just wipe screen counting error. Okay, so very interesting stuff. And we do know for a fact that they basically said, Bungie said, that their testing team, they go right up until the limit, until realistically where the testing team is able to clear their best testing team, and then they hit it down a little bit from there, right? And so it makes sense, because all of these, you know, it makes sense then for contests that all of these bosses would have some level of custom tuning. So with that out of the way, let's go into the numbers here. I will show you the graph on screen that proves that, you know, I measured the health. And by the way, even if the wipe screen is inaccurate or there's chunking or something, all of these data points that I was able to gather basically exist on a line, right? On a linear model. And so even if all of the wipe screen numbers are off by a little bit, they're all off by the same amount. And so they were able to still produce a reproducible, consistent health value. So Iatros on normal has around 250k health. On contest, he had around 210k, which is a 16% drop. This is equivalent to 1.339 witnesses. I'm just giving you like a ballpark range here. When I say witnesses, by the way, I'm basically saying on witness on normal difficulty. So right now, if you went into witness and you compared the amount of damage you would have to do, the experience of being able to kill Iatros on contest, on this contest race, is the same as the experience of needing to kill 1.339 witnesses on normal. Okay, so when I say 4 witnesses, 1 witness, 6 witnesses, I'm simply referring to the experience comparison. being able to, let's say, one phasing Eatros on contest DP would be the same as one phasing the witness, but, you know, with 1.339 times of his health. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I know the measurement unit is not the greatest, but I wanted something that was more tangible for people. So Agraios, normal health, 530k. On contest, 676k or 677k. 28% increase to health, approximately 4.32 witnesses worth of health. And then finally, Koragos. This is the big one. Normal health, 756k. Contest, 960k. He had almost 1 million health on contest, equivalent to about 6.12 witnesses of damage. And the final stand alone, just his final stand, is equivalent, almost exactly equivalent to normal Rulk's entire non-final health bar. So if you were to load into a Rulk right now, if you're loaded into a Rulk checkpoint on normal right now, and you had a team of 6 and you damaged him right up until final stand, that is the equivalent experience. You need the same amount of damage to do just Koragos' final stand, which is 10% of his health. So 96k on contest. And if you add in the fact that your damage is reduced by a certain amount, it is equivalent to Rulk's entire non-final health bar. Insane. Pretty insane stuff, right? That's why final felt so tight for a lot of people, because this guy had more health. He had more health on contest. There was custom contest tuning. Okay, so now the question you might be asking is, well, if the DP bosses were custom tuned, what about SE, right? Did they custom tune that experience too? And is it fair to really compare, you know, contest to contest when maybe witness health was inflated by a lot, so it was actually like harder than it seems on paper? The answer is no. Unfortunately, I did not have DDT open during my witness clear on SE day 1, but I did have footage, right? And so we had a wipe where we did 95-ish% of the witness's health, which is equivalent to 42 out of 845 pixels were remaining. And if you add up the wipe screen on that wipe, it was 25.446 million damage. And then if you compare that to his full health bar, you just, 100 over 95 multiplied by the 25 million number there, you get 26.777 million health. If you convert the Echo scalar to the Heresy recommended power level, you get 27-ish million health. And when I measured witness health in Heresy, he had 26.8 million, which is close enough that could have been error on either end here, right? Remember, I'm not even using DDT. I'm just counting pixels. I don't have like multiple data points or anything. So could very well have been pixel error that could have explained this difference. But that is close enough that I would say that there was no tuning, at least to the health value, right? They could have obviously made contest first and made his health a certain amount, and then afterward, just not changed it. But there was no tuning from normal difficulty on contest SE. With that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about the summary. So compared to Salvation's Edge, the Desert Perpetual race featured, number 1, the highest amount of meta disables ever in raid racing, especially in close proximity to the race. 2 days before the race was happening, we had 3 meta options that were alternatives to the number 1 pick in the meta at the time. They were all also disabled, something that's never happened before. And I would say something that's unprecedented as well is something that stylistically was advertised as being part of the DLC. So like the super changes being like, oh, the supers are going to be so strong now. And Bungie, at least internally, should be aware. I mean, in theory, they are aware that Outbreak is good at genning supers, and so are certain primaries. I mean, I made videos about this. People have been talking about this. Teams were discussing this before even the DLC came out. And so in theory, they're aware of this, and they still disable stuff like Hierarchy and stuff like, Barodiad, even though these weapons are technically functioning as intended. I know they've nerfed them now, but more than any other race, I feel like in this race, Bungie definitely had some disables where it was more like, oh no, we don't want you playing like that. Or, oh no, we don't want you to just, use Hierarchy on day 1. Rather than, oh, this is like actually broken and like we know people are like going to use this. Like, for example, like Banner of War leading into Crota, which again is kind of an exception in and of itself. The other 4 races that I mentioned on that slide, none of them include like a new thing that is like OP, right? It's like Still Hunt wasn't disabled for like SE. So yeah, just interesting, especially in close proximity to the race. Definitely made people feel a certain way leading into the race. And then second, reserve cuts to almost every meta weapon available. So Bungie gave us a sandbox where you're going to go into a raid race with some of the highest health. I mean, we talked about this. Some of the highest health, effective health. The amount of bullets you need to sink into these bosses is more than ever before. And then they nerf the reserves on our weapons that have limited ammo, And then they disabled a bunch of our weapons that have unlimited ammo that we were planning on using instead. So definitely a very interesting, like, restricted sandbox. And then number 3, constant run-ins with the instance bug. I mean, every day 1 raid race, almost all of them, I would say, they've had some issue with error codes and stuff like that, and like weapon leveling and XP bug and whatnot. But I guess that also, you know, impacted people as well. And then the last 2 points, which are, I guess, the special features of this video: 47% cut to your outgoing damage versus the final shape. And we talked about how this is kind of an apples to apples comparison, because I've tried to equalize for a bunch of other factors, and you do just in fact lose around half of your damage compared to past races. And then the 5th point here, 25% or more additional health for some of the hardest damage checks in the raid. So crazy stuff. There's like, you're really being, during this race, players were really pulled at from a bunch of different angles, right? You have heavy weapon, special weapon, reserve nerfs across the board. You have primary weapon, disables. You have way less damage to the bosses themselves. And not only do the bosses have way more health, we talked about this in the boss health video, have way more health than any other boss we've seen before. I mean, literally 2 of these bosses, even one of the minor bosses, has around the same health as Witness. And then the final boss just towers above every other boss that we've had in this game when it comes to total damage, on top of the fact that you have an additional amount of health being added to these bosses for custom contest tuning to curate that experience. So pretty interesting stuff. I've never really covered a video like this before. I don't think any content creator really has. And I was very fortunate to have DDT open during the race in order to actually keep track of how much health these bosses had. Yeah, I mean, DDT, it's not like perfect, I guess. It's like pixel by pixel. So there are definitely, like, you know, slightly more precise methods. And the wipe screen is maybe like a little bit off, but I think 28% is like big enough that it can't just be the wipe screen, you know, being wrong. Like, if you add, I mean, if you literally go in to your day 1 footage and you add up the numbers on these wipe screens, you will see exactly what I mean. I mean, Kragos off contest has like 750k health or something. And then during contest, if you go and add up the wipe screen numbers after like a final stand wipe, and you will see what I'm talking about. It's like 900k, right? It's like over 900k. So yeah, pretty crazy stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Oh, one more thing actually I forgot to cover, right? I'm going to show a graph on screen real quick. I have definitive evidence, okay, that there is no front loading or back loading in raids. At least for the bosses that I've tested. Okay, I don't need to say that disclaimer anymore. There is no front loading or back loading in Destiny 2. Okay, there is no front loading or back loading in Destiny 2. I have a DDT measurement of a contest Kragos where you can see we have a final stand wipe and there is no difference in the linear model's slope. Okay, there is no difference at all. So there is no front loading or back loading in Destiny 2. Okay, otherwise some of the data points on this graph would stray away from the general trend of the rest of the data points, but that's not the case. Okay, so there's no front loading, there's no back loading, unless they introduce it as a novel thing in the future. That aside, tangent aside, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is a really cool video, really cool topic. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys share it with your friends. And I can't wait to do some damage testing. Oh my god, damage testing is going to be crazy going into this epic raid race. There are so many options that we have to test. So super excited to do that. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Pretty enthusiastic to make it, and one of the coolest video ideas I've had in a while. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and have a great rest of your day.